Catholics that actually understand intelligent design arguments, that actually read, say, Mike Behe's book, usually realize that ID is quite consonant with Catholic beliefs. The core propositions of Catholic theology is that God can be known by natural reason apart from revelation, simply by observing the created order. That doesn't mean we're going to learn everything we can about God by studying biology or astronomy, but it does say that the created order has these revelatory qualities. And you could really think of intelligent design as a way to sort of systematically make explicit God's general revelation of Himself in nature. The other thing is that Catholic theology has always maintained a very robust view of human reason. Certainly scientific reasoning and scientific methods are part of human reason, but that's not the only way we exercise our reason. We have moral knowledge and moral reasoning. We have philosophical knowledge and metaphysical knowledge and reasoning, all of which are part of the purview of human reason. Scientific reasoning is a part of that, but human reason is never to be reduced merely to science. So these are both themes, I think, that show that Catholic theology and ID are compatible. There are a few Catholic critics of intelligent design, and they often speak as if they represent Catholicism as a whole. But in most cases, I would say that these critics of ID are what I call uncharitable critics. That is, they tend not to actually read the intelligent design literature. They haven't read Steve Meyer, Bill Dembski, or Mike Behe. And they tend to read what we're saying in the most uncharitable possible light. Some people hear Mike Behe's argument, in which he argues for the irreducible complexity of so-called molecular machines, and they'll say, well, see there, Behe is implying that organisms are just machines. Well, that's to completely misunderstand Behe's argument. Certain things, certain sort of subsystems in biology can be described as machines in the sense that they have a number of interacting parts that have to be put together in a certain way in order for the part to have a function. That's perfectly okay. In fact, biologists speak this way all the time. Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle spoke this way. But it doesn't follow that to describe something as like a machine or even as a machine in biology, that the organism itself is a machine or is just a machine. That just simply doesn't follow. So it's really important to look at the details of what ID people are arguing rather than sort of attribute to them some presumed philosophy of nature that they don't in fact hold. Another common criticism that some Catholic critics have about intelligent design is that ID is wedded to a so-called interventionist view of God. Now, there's a couple of things to be said about this. I mean, obviously the first thing is that Catholic theology is perfectly comfortable with God acting in a variety of different ways in the created order. God creates the world ex nihilo, from nothing, of course, in the beginning, but God can also act directly or primarily in the natural world. He calls Abraham to Himself. He becomes incarnate as Jesus. He raises Jesus from the dead, changes water into wine. This is all just a piece of Catholic theology. So there's nothing problematic in saying that God could act directly in the created order in the history of life either. So there's nothing that's a problem in Catholic theology with suggesting that you could have a God acting directly. At the same time, it's not true that ID is connected to this specific picture of God. What intelligent design is basically an attempt at pattern recognition. ID argues that certain patterns in nature are best explained as the result of an intelligent agent. But that's not the same thing as saying when and exactly how an intelligent agent works in nature. It may be that God implemented His design in a variety of different ways, through secondary causes at the Big Bang or something like that. That's really an open question. ID is primarily concerned with detecting the effects of intelligence rather than focusing on the specific locations within the created order where God has acted directly. That's a really important distinction to keep in mind. Some Catholic intellectuals find it strange that ID theorists often argue that intelligent design is science. They actually do this for three really good reasons. The first reason design theorists argue that intelligent design is science is that any definition of science realistic enough and liberal enough to include all the stuff we consider to be science, so theories of origin of the universe, origin of life, historical theories like biological evolution, is going to be broad enough to include arguments for intelligent design. Remember, any argument for ID, at least in biology, is usually a competitor to a Darwinian explanation for explaining the same set of biological facts. You can't make one of those explanations philosophy and the other science and still be consistent. The second reason is that intelligent design focuses on evidence from the natural sciences. We're not talking about the nature of knowledge or the nature of God or something like that. We're talking about features in biology or astronomy or cosmology. That's under the purview of science. And so the very evidence that we're talking about and the thing we're studying are the things that natural science studies. The third reason that ID falls within science is because ID uses common canons of reasoning. ID arguments don't appeal to private revelations or to interpretations of the first chapter of Genesis. We appeal to reasoning methods that are well attested already in the historical and the natural sciences. So there's no reason not to consider intelligent design within science, even if intelligent design arguments have obvious philosophical and metaphysical implications. And some Catholic intellectuals misunderstand this. They'll say, well, I mean, at best, intelligent design arguments are philosophy or they're theology, but not science. I mean, ID theorists are talking about so-called formal and final causation, and that's presumably supposed to be the purview of metaphysics or philosophy, and not science. Science is supposedly supposed to deal with just material and efficient causation. This is really, I think, a misunderstanding, though. Certainly in the Catholic tradition, all four causes that Aristotle specified, so the formal, the final, the material, and the efficient cause, are real causes. They have real explaining to do in the natural order. What's happened, though, in the modern world is that Aristotle's distinctions of four different causes have been split out so that you give a couple of the causes to philosophy and theology and a couple of the other causes to science. This is actually an artifact of Francis Bacon's philosophy of nature. It has nothing to do with the traditional Catholic philosophy of nature. Thomas Aquinas, in fact, said that you can only understand the material and the efficient cause ultimately in light of the final and the formal cause. So why on earth would Thomas Aquinas have given us advice to say, let's actually divide up the communities and the people that are allowed to talk about these causes in nature so that they can interact? I mean, that would literally be a formula for unintelligibility in science and philosophy. Now, Thomas Aquinas, for instance, might have said what type of science is happening here in intelligent design. Remember, Thomas thought of metaphysics and philosophy and theology as themselves sciences. But what happened in the modern age is that the word science came to be used explicitly and exclusively for natural science, and everything else got downgraded. That's one of the unfortunate results of the scientific revolution after Francis Bacon.